Hi, I'm Ember Conley, your host for Political Peaks. Today, we're joined with Dr. James Harvey, who has recently co-authored an article that was in the New York Daily Times, and it was co-authored with Norman Ornstein. And it's about calling upon the White House to really take a look at the current state of our children in the United States. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, Amber. I'm delighted to be here.
Dr. Harvey, let's just start out around a little bit about your background, of course, the partnership that you've had with Dr. Ornstein, and then what really led you, both of you, to write this article.
Sure. As I think you know, I'm originally from Ireland. So this country has been very good to me, and it was primarily the education system that's made it possible for me to have the sort of life that I've had. I worked in the House Committee on Education and Labor, the House of Representatives in the U.S. Capitol, and I worked in the Carter White House as a lobbyist helping establish the U.S. Department of Education. So I've had this long-term interest in education and the welfare of children. And one of the things I've noticed in recent decades as I've worked with school superintendents is that schools increasingly are required to address all of the challenges that are facing children. And a lot of the social services that used to be available to families and to children are no longer. So last September, UNICEF, which is a United Nations agency that worries about children's welfare, published a report entitled Worlds of Influence, Understanding What Shapes Child Well-Being in Rich Countries. And this report confirmed what I'd been worried about for a long time, namely that the welfare of children in the United States is not outstanding. In fact, of the 38 wealthy nations that UNICEF examined, they concluded that the United States ranked about 36 on a wide variety of indicators, such as access to health, bullying, the incidence of low birth weight babies, violence in communities, that sort of thing. We're 36 out of 38, and in terms of access to health care, we're 38th out of 38. That got me to thinking about a White House conference I had heard about years ago on small business. And it was a conference that was preceded by 50 state conferences that brought recommendations to the White House. This was a conference convened by President Nixon for assisting small businesses in the United States. And when I looked into it, I realized that there had been 7 or 8 prior White House conferences on children by presidents from both parties. They'd actually taken place just about every 10 years, starting in 1909 with Teddy Roosevelt. So presidents from both parties, Roosevelt, Wilson, Herbert Hoover, FDR, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Truman, and Clinton, they'd all pulled together White House conferences of one kind or another, broadly on children's welfare, and they'd had significant impact. So I talked to Norm, whom I didn't know terribly well, but I'd known him from my time on Capitol Hill years ago, about this issue, and he immediately agreed to co-author with me this piece that we put into the New York Daily News about 2 months ago.
Right, and that article, of course, has a wealth of information. And there's a statement that you wrote together, and it says, school failure is not the symptom, is the symptom, not the cause, excuse me. It is simply light being shown on the toxic environment in which so many children exist. In truth, too many children are arriving at school too traumatized to learn. And that really, pinpoints that idea of, as we continue to look at education, especially now with COVID and the impacts that we've had with COVID, it seems that these have just continued to escalate these very deep-rooted problems. Since you've written this, what has the response been?
Well, the response has been pretty good. It's been it's been tweeted out by different people. I'm not that familiar with the modern language about this, and I've been talking to the former governor of Pennsylvania, Edward Rendell, about bringing it to the attention of the White House, and Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, his staff is considering doing something with this. So, with the turnover in administrations, it's very difficult to get people's attention right now. But we're going to keep on plugging away at this because I think it's very significant. It's easy to be cynical about efforts like this and say, well, what comes out of them? Do they do any good? But in fact, they do. The Teddy Roosevelt Conference produced child welfare legislation and wrote up the standards under which children are allowed to work, because before that, very young children were being sent down into coal mines and that sort of thing. President Clinton's White House Conference on Child Care produced CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, which helped insure millions, actually, of children under Medicaid. They also introduce ideas that float around in the political water, and lo and behold, decades later, they bear fruit. So one of the White House conferences, I think it was Hoover's conference, first brought up the challenge of dealing with children with disabilities, and lo and behold, in the 1970s, Congress started taking that seriously. And Truman's conference brought up the possibility of creating a U.S. Department of Education. And lo and behold, 40 years later, a U.S. Department of Education was created. So they can have significant immediate effects and significant long-term effects by introducing into the national conversation ideas that take a while to percolate to the top, but ultimately they become reality.
Well, and I think you hit it just perfectly when you talk about that national conversation, right? Education has continued to be at the top of so many legislators around how can we truly improve education. But even uniquely is that, for the first time we have, not for the first time, but we have a First Lady that is an educator that can, again, use that influence to help us really bring that it's so much more than education, right? Like this is hitting the ideas of long-term effects of poverty and hunger and homelessness, all of which you very much hit in these articles.
That's exactly right, Ember. You mentioned earlier the pandemic. The pandemic didn't create these problems, but it revealed a lot of them and it highlighted a lot of them. One of the positive things I think that came out of the pandemic was that the American people, for the very first time, became aware of the fact that schools day in and day out were providing hundreds of millions of meals to American children. It's quite astounding. Without these meal programs for children, far more children will be going hungry than are going hungry. So this notion of the White House conference is an effort to get a national conversation going about the welfare of children in the United States. I mean, if you think about it, it's quite shocking that in the wealthiest country in the world, we've got 12 million children on the verge of hunger day in and day out. And more than half of the children attending public schools in this country come from families with such low incomes that they're entitled to free or reduced meals at the school. So this whole panoply of problems affecting children, violence in the community, hunger stalking American children. The truth of the matter is there are many, many, many ways in which schools are failing our kids.
Absolutely.
But it's also true that there are many, many ways in which society is failing them too, and that the schools can't fix all of these problems.
No, and really this call to action, at that federal level that you're speaking about is to really take a look at the federal policies that might be hindering action or that could be definitely added to be able to support our families and our communities, because at the end of it, the children is just a reflection of our communities. So I just want to say thank you for writing this, really taking it to that national level, and sharing your experience and also the results of what something like this could substantially help our education system here in the United States.
Well, thank you very much. I was pleased for the opportunity, Ember, to talk to you about this. It's not just the national level; it would also be, we're talking about state level conferences, so we could look at state level issues too, and bring the wisdom of these state level meetings to the White House for consideration at the national level. It's going to take the best efforts of all of us to address these issues.
Well, absolutely. And when you talk about, and I'll use Utah in particular, is that of course we have a large population here on the Wasatch Front in the Salt Lake area, Provo area, but much of our state is rural, and you get into the rural communities and the issues are the same all across rural America. So thank you for sharing that. We definitely will be sharing with our legislators and our community leaders here. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Delighted to have the opportunity. Thank you, Ember.
I'm Ember Conley, your host for Political Peaks. Remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Park City TV.